But the way that it works with your essays on an AP exam, number one, you will never know what you got on the essays. You won't know what you got on your multiple choice. The only thing that you're going to get come around the first week of July is, well, you'll check it online, and then you'll probably get a thing in the mail. It'll just say AP exam score. You got a 3, you got a 4, you got a 5. You won't know what made you get that score. You won't know if the multiple choice was okay and you really took care of business on the essay. Did you have the highest score ever? Or you got all the multiple choice right and all 9s on your essay, and therefore you got a big time 5. You don't know what goes into it. The only thing that I'll be able to know that's a little bit more detailed is I'll get a group score, and group isn't going to be 7th period, but it'll be North Hills High School, where I'll know what was the average essay score for the rhetorical analysis, the DRQ, the synthesis. But I can't extrapolate from that. Well, I think Truth got a 6. Gary got a whatever, Mitchell got a 3. I won't be able to determine that stuff. You'll probably know that I did well on that one was okay, that one was a fight, but you're not going to be able to get the specifics. But when it comes to your essays, only one person will score your DRQ. Only one person, a separate person, will score your synthesis. One person will score your rhetorical analysis. So your essay is not getting passed around a boardroom where we gave it a 4, a 3, a 7, a 9, a 2, and take the average of the scores. You won't have two test scorers arm wrestling over this is why it should be a 6, this is why it'll be a 7. Someone's going to go 6, put it in the pile, move on to the next one. So there's not going to be like a big old discussion about it. The good thing is the people that are scoring it, for the most part, most of them are going to be AP English Language and composition teachers. So they know what you're dealing with. They know that it's going to be a rough draft. To be an AP scorer, you have to teach the course for at least 5 years, and you go through training and all that kind of stuff. There will be some other folks who are more like maybe retired college professors or people who work with College Board, but predominantly it's going to be AP teachers, so they know what you're dealing with. But they'll score, and they're going to move on to the next one. They will have sample essays, like the packet that you have in front of you, where before they start reading, it'll be determined that this essay got a 9, this one got an 8, a 7, a 6, a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So they'll have references. So if they take a look at Jenna's essay and they're torn, is this a 7 or is this an 8, they can look at other 7s and 8s and kind of get a sense, okay, it is better than that one, it's not as good as that one, and go from there. They don't do pluses and minuses. Remember, that's a whole Mr. Kane thing to give me more flexibility. So if someone gets a 7 plus, like it's a really strong 7, or it barely made it into a 7, 7 minus, AP exam, they're both 7s. So you don't have to worry about where in that house it kind of falls. Adele, do you have a question? I mean, I'm sure you could. You can always get lucky in that sense, but I would say, yeah, they're pretty consistent. They're objective. These are folks, I mean, all they're doing for an entire week is they are scoring that one essay. So some poor soul probably graded like 2,000 Milan Kundera DRQs for a week. You get pretty, you know what's going to kind of make the cut, at that point. In that sense, yeah, I'd say they're pretty consistent with it. The only reason that you would get multiple people viewing the essay would be if you were new to this as a test scorer, because you work at a table, there's like 10 of you, and there's a table leader, a person who's a veteran person or she who's been there for a while. If the truth is that table leader and you're the newbie, she'll look over your shoulder every now and then and maybe talk to you just, why'd you give it a 7? Not criticizing, but just seeing what your explanation is. And once she's satisfied that you're right on target and know what you're doing, she'll let you be. But if you've been there for a couple of years, they pretty much trust that you know what's going on. Now, there would certainly be discussion before the scoring would happen. These are the things that we would want to look for, keep an eye out on this. But I don't think you're going to come across someone going, today is the best day of my life. 9s for everyone. Because someone would start to notice, why is that Mitchell Gray guy giving everyone 9s or 2s? So I don't think that will most likely happen. One thing with the argument, and it's going to happen with these questions, the primary example that these folks go back to is Bill Clinton. And it makes sense because the essay is written in 2002. So Clinton's scandal is more, it's a good example of public-private life, intersecting. It's very fresh in their memories. So if Duncan is the first essay he read and, writes about Bill Clinton, wow, that was a good example. I like that. 8. And then Rebecca is the 714th essay to make reference to Bill Clinton. They can't go, I am so sick and tired of this same example. Shame on her, 3. The merit behind his example and her example, so long as they're explained equally, would be exactly the same. And the same thing would happen with us. If there's a lot of similar examples to come back to, I can't penalize you for writing something that someone else did. Unless I think you all went to the same SparkNotes page and Gary was distributing, notes out to people in second period. He would never do that. But all examples are equally valid, regardless if it's the first time you read it or the 917th.
What does mean?
So the letters means nothing. And that would be for all of them. If they were listed as essay A, B, C, D, people automatically start to think, ooh, A's the good one, F is the bad one. So they just get random letters associated with them, but there's no secret code. It doesn't get a 7 because 007 would be neat to have, written at the top of the page. Notice the rubric that you have, the single sheet, and it's front and back because you have the score. The rubric is specified to this particular prompt. So you take a look at like 8. Essays earning the score of 8 successfully establish and support their position in relation to Kundera's claim. Arguments contain appropriate evidence, well-developed and cogent. The writing is effective but not flawless. At no point is it expected that the essay is going to be perfect. All essays would be expected that revision could take place. The rough drafts, you're handwriting it. You got like 40 minutes, so there would be things that you would want to do. But the essay scores, and they're bolded within your course syllabus, of an 8, a 6, and then a 4 and a 2 on the back. Those are considered the anchor scores. A 4. Is a 4 passing or not passing? Still not passing. 5 is that benchmark that you would look for. 4 they look at as being inadequate. The 3 main areas, remember, you're looking at is focus of argument, evidence, overall style. So you could be a really good writer, but if your argument is flawed and you don't have any appropriate evidence, they're not going to bump you up to a 5 because your evidence, your argument is still ultimately inadequate. 6 is my least favorite wording. They go, it's adequate. Good job, Gray. You didn't mess up too much. You're adequate. You get a 6. A 6 is a good score. I just don't like the wording of being told that's adequate. And then an 8 is, they use the term appropriate here, which is fine. I would also use the term effective, where the argument is appropriate, effective, the evidence is appropriate, and effective. You can tell that they can write pretty well. But for the most part, 6 and 7s go together. 8s and 9s go together in the sense that argumentatively they're probably very much the same. A 7 more likely just as better writing style. So adequate, argument and evidence. Some run-on sentences, it's okay. Ooh, beautiful writing. Jenna gets the 7, you get the 6. What could make Jenna upset is Duncan has effective evidence and effective argument, but your writing's kind of like Gray's, where it's not bad, but there's not anything great about it. We could look at Jenna's and go, this person can write. That guy came up with a good argument, but he's not really a great writer. He could still get the 8 because the effectiveness of the argument, the support, could supersede your ability to use a semicolon. And then but again, she's not going to know that, so she'll be happy that she got her passing score anyway. But 8s and 9s are kind of in that same ballpark. 6 and 7s are kind of in the same ballpark. The wild card is a 5, because a 5 is still pretty inconsistent, unevenly developed, but there's enough there that you can kind of go, all right, they're better than inadequate. I can see some promise. You get the benefit of the doubt with that one. I hate giving out 5s because it seems like such a cop-out. But, I mean, sometimes it's a 5. So if in some ways you can tell you're doing what you're supposed to, and others it gets a little uneven, it's better than that 4. That's where you can kind of get a 5. But a 6 would definitely be more consistent top to bottom. So the first question that a scorer would ask him or herself is,
do ideas stuff?
Not really. You do have, remember the prompts are in a separate booklet, so you can write on the prompts, and you have those 15 minutes to kind of scribble out some ideas on the prompt sheet, on the prompt booklet, but there's not like separate paper that you would use. You probably could ask for some. I had a student a few years ago who had terrible handwriting, since we were talking about that. He ran out of paper, which they give you a lot of paper. And he said he asked for additional scrap paper, and they gave it to him, and that was inserted into his testing booklet as additional stuff. But I know they don't come around and here's your scratch paper that you would use. I would think the testing booklet would be enough for you to get your stuff across. Look at the score of a 6. Essays earning a score of a 6 adequately establish and support their position in relation to Kundera's claim. Clinton, Kennedy, Roosevelt, King, teachers. Their arguments are generally sound and provide sufficient evidence. That word sufficient is the tricky one, but they are also less developed or less cogent than essays earning higher scores. Now, we haven't seen essays earning higher scores, but if you're going, there should have been more development. That less developed than essays earning higher scores kind of gives you, an idea that that's a possibility. The writing is generally clear, but may contain lapses in diction or syntax, which they do have a couple examples of things where I think for this one they used the wrong.
If I don't summarize it, you'll get it.
The danger is when, I give you a 2 on an essay, you're going to be like, wait a minute, that Kundera one was way worse than mine. I should at least get a 3.
I don't like starting the same thing.
1 and 2 plus 0 or dash. So you can get below a 0. You could get a dash, a blank response. Nothing has been done, or you went completely off topic. I like trains, and that's the only thing that you would write. Those are the ones that you really look at as, all right, which category does it fit into? If it gets an essay score of a 2, or it's in the category of a 2, it's basically looked at as being or little success for a 2. I was going to say inadequate, but that's a 4. So this is one where the person's not really doing a whole lot well, and we'll get into some examples of that. But a 1, a 2, a 3 are all kind of in with the same neighborhood. There's really not a whole lot going for it. They tried, but it didn't work for whatever reason. And you're not going to get asking, will I get lucky some days? They're not going to turn a 3 essay, into a 6 or something along those lines. What's, 5 higher, 4 lower, and then where
Scrap paper.
then in the mystery. The rubric, it's a perfect 2 in the sense that, yes, it fails to present an argument. Substitute a simpler task such as summary and may seriously misread the passage or unsubstantial claims. The writing demonstrates consistent weaknesses. They summarize. So this could be, I had 3 minutes. This is the best that I could do. Could be that they just simply did not know what to do, and when in doubt, I'll summarize. Which you can empathize. And that's why they got a 2 and not a 0 or a dash. Because they were on topic.
Yeah.
Stack within that little success, inadequate, adequate, appropriate kind of area. The first 4 essays that you have, so I, kind of a letdown, and then see, there's also KK. I don't know if we should go or is this I'm thinking it's just for difference. These are all anchor scores in that they are even numbers. So the first 4, one's a 2, one's a 4, one's a 6, one's an 8. So we'll take a look at them knowing that it's going to be those scores, but still looking at the rubric to go, this is why it's appropriate, this is why it's adequate. Tomorrow, the other 5 that we'll look at, those are the 1s, the 3, the 5, the 7, the 9s that kind of that fit in the same category but kind of fall into other realms of those. Get ready to listen to not listen to Bill Clinton, but hear about Bill Clinton quite a bit. The division between the private and public life and the individual is an important barrier that should not be tampered with. As Milan Kundera asserts, private and public life are 2 essentially different worlds, and the differences is the indispensable condition for a man to live free. The consequences of personal life being brought under the scrutiny of the public eye, or even the consideration of personal matters and public decisions, can be costly for everybody, not necessarily just the individuals involved. Okay with that intro? Do they take a position? I mean, the barrier should not be tampered with. We know that much. I'll switch to yellow. I do like something about the end of the paragraph. Who gets affected, impacted? So not just those who are involved, but it could be everybody. Now, I like that aspect, but what does that mean the person is going to have to do for it to be successful? They're going to have to include everybody, not why this was just bad for Bill Clinton or whatnot. The hardest thing for people to do, and it's completely understandable, is to stay true to the argument that you say you're going to do. You might come up with one that's not too sophisticated, but too detailed that you can't follow through with. You might come up with one and then have some new ideas while you're writing. And so not that you go off topic, but you kind of go in a different direction than you originally said you were going to. So there's a lot of things that can happen that could keep you from maybe doing what you initially promised. But they haven't done anything wrong, at this point. An excellent example of private lives that should not have been considered related to public life is that of former presidents Clinton, Kennedy, and Roosevelt. Although all three of these presidents are considered to have done an exceptional job while in office, their public life, all three of these presidents also indulged in extramarital relationships. Another example is Martin Luther King, who indulged himself privately as well. If these four great leaders had all been judged purely on a personal, private level, each one could be made out to be quite a bad person. However, history had recorded them as being the most influential, in a good way, men of their times.
I think it's alright. I think just
Gave examples, but they didn't explain.
So what's the good thing for them is, okay, we got examples, we got Clinton, we have Kennedy, we have Roosevelt, they mention presidents, then we go on to King. What they don't really say is, they mention extramarital relationships, and certainly the Clinton one is going to make sense to people. I think the Kennedy one probably will, and that'd be more commonly accepted. I could see people going Roosevelt and going, or doing absolutely nothing. When they say President Roosevelt, what'd you just say? Which one? Are we talking Teddy? We're talking FDR. And then I think they're going FDR is the example that they're going with. But that's not one that is as commonly known or discussed as much as like Kennedy and Clinton. So the explanation isn't quite there as much. Another example is Martin Luther King, who indulged himself privately as well. That is a pretty vague statement that is being made at that point. I didn't mean to cross it out there. We don't really know entirely what the person means by that. Do know historically that FBI had a lot of wiretaps and investigations going on during the civil rights movement on a lot of leaders, and so I think they're alluding to that kind of stuff, but without the detail, it's not something that we really truly know what they absolutely mean by it. They do come up with examples, so that is definitely a feather in their cap. I do agree that I think they probably could have done a little bit more to explain so that the reader clearly knows what it is that they mean. You can't rely on the reader connecting the dots that you lay out. You got to draw the picture, spell everything out for them to truly be able to understand what you mean by it. But is it evidence? Yeah, it is. The difference between personal and public life can also be seen in the example of something simple. Names. When in the classroom, a teacher is required to maintain formally to a certain extent by referring to a teacher as Mr. and Mrs. This is the public life of the teacher. However, if a student were to become good friends with the teacher's child, then Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so might ask the student to refer to them on a first-name basis when coming over to their house. You will never come to my house, Savannah. Don't ever get that idea.
It's kind of weird. Let's go to the cast.
Rebecca, you were at my house once, I guess, or a couple times. Okay, she gets a freebie. Don't worry about it. A-B conversation. See your way out.
What was I doing?
Little craftiness there.
It's true.
What? What, this Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so thing?
Yeah. Going over teachers.
This would be totally appropriate. No, it wouldn't.
Why would it not be?
Mr. However, once back in the classroom, it would not be.
Not if I was best friends with if people's mom was my teacher. Yeah, like my mom, like
Wouldn't you just still call them Mr. and Mrs.?
Well, I think it also depends
It
who you knew first.
It depends. I mean, and certainly, like, so if, say your parents are friends with a teacher in the building, you're certainly going to know them outside of classroom situation, and you could meet them first outside, know them as just a regular person as opposed to teacher. It could, and it could also, well, we are. I could also see situations where, say, you run into commonly like a teacher outside of school basis. You go to the same church, temple, synagogue. Parents are friends with them, and they play cards every weekend or whatever. That could be a situation that does kind of make the clouds, what's the public-private life. However, their example, it's pretty brief where they're not truly, again, kind of connecting all those dots. I know what they mean by it. You know what they mean by it to a degree, but I don't really know what they fully are thinking, what the example would be in their heads. I know nothing, obviously, about the writer. If they had, and it's a big if they did have a relationship with a teacher where it would be like this, where, they go to the same church together, parents grew up together, always been friends of the family, to put it into a personal anecdote, I've grown up knowing my bio teacher or whatever, I think that would be more effective than this hypothetical Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so kind of thing. But the way that it is, I get it, but they don't quite explain it fully for us.
Just make up a personal anecdote, make up a fake biography you never had?
In theory, you could. I wouldn't. So, let's say this person does not have a situation like that. I would do something like, hypothetically, theoretically, a person could know Mr. or Mrs. whatever name kind of comes up. And there's no surefire guarantee that you make something up, they're going to know and automatically go terrible example. The only thing I can say is when it comes to when we do college essays and you have to write about yourself, sometimes I'll have conversations that, Kayla, did this really happen? Or are you kind of tweaking things a little bit? Maybe. Or no, it really did happen. But you can generally kind of tell. I don't know how to explain it, but something is just kind of fuzzy or off, about it. But in theory, yes, you could. There's no reason that you have to be fearful of using the word I if you're doing a personal anecdote. You can say I, when I was growing up. You don't have to go when the writer was in his younger years. That's just going to sound terrible.
So if you were to use something like that, should you make up a name, or are you better off just saying, they use Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so? Is there...
If a student were to become good friends with the teacher's child, then the title Mr. or Mrs. might not be what the so-and-so, I get it. It just sounds a little off to me, so I'd probably kind of reword it. There'd be nothing wrong with doing Smith, Jones, Anderson, pretty common names, and I think people would understand that. If you went Mr. Cleric, maybe then they would start to assume that, there's a more specific example that you're kind of going with. But I think if you went with a generic last name, that'd be fine. The consequences of tearing the curtain down between the private and professional or public life of a person can be very harmful to all those involved. This could be seen in the exposure of Clinton to the public, brought about a lengthy impeachment that halted any important legislation that needed to be passed. What do they kind of do there? It's subtle, but I do give them thumbs up. Because what did I like about their thesis? Costly for everyone. They don't go into great detail. It'd be nice if there was a specific piece of legislation that we knew about that got halted, but they at least do kind of go back to it. Just as by calling a teacher by a first name in a classroom would be totally inappropriate, this goes to show that Milan Kundera was accurate in his analysis of Jan Prochazka's exposure. The private life of a person should remain private. It's kind of like a body paragraph conclusion wrapped into one a little bit with some explanation. Keep in mind, this is prompt number 3, question number 3. Chances are they answered them in order, 1, 2, 3. What are most of these people probably dealing with? Running out of time. So to have a combined conclusion body paragraph is not the worst thing in the world. It's better to include it than to completely omit it. Overall, how do you feel?
Yeah, I feel like it's right on the edge.
What?
I can
I'm
say
thinking
4 or
a
6.
6. I
Definitely a 6.
Well, and so keep in mind that edge is, because we know it's a 4 or a 6 if we're knocking out a 2 and an 8. Like if you did not, if I just said it's anything, does the essay pass?
Yes.
Would you feel reasonably confident that it passes?
Yeah.
Mitchell, you're thinking no.
No.
Okay, and also this is the first one that we're taking a look at, so we don't really have a whole lot to kind of base it from. Overall, the essay score for O is a 6, so it does pass. So, a couple things. Number one, I would hope you look at it and go, I can do that. I also hope you could look at it and go, I think I would do some things differently. Now, I would caution you, it's easier to edit something that's already there than to come up with something, right on the fly and whatnot. So for you to go, oh, I would have included this, this, and this, you very well may have. Would you think of that right at the time after you just finished the synthesis and a rhetorical analysis? Maybe, maybe not.
This is a weird thing.
So-and-so, sentence. Yeah, then Mr. So-and-so might ask that the student refer them by different names. So there's stuff that they could definitely do better, but there's enough there, Mitchell, that it's going to be considered adequate. Mitchell, we're focused on this.
I'm sorry.
Remember when you would send me those Big Daddy texts all the time? Thank goodness that came to an end. People may use masks to hide what they're going through privately. When one is in public, manners are evident and one tries to impress others. When one lets someone into their private world, it is different. The person can relax and be themselves and don't feel that they have any obligation to impress another. I agree with Kundera's claim that the private and public worlds are very different and one should not try to reveal both in another person's life. They make an argument. They use I, which I'm not, crazy about, but the argument is there. I like the masks idea. I think that's a nice kind of little intro thing to get into. People make mistakes. It is that simple. When a person does something privately, it shouldn't be a public issue. One example of this happened very recently with our former President Clinton and his intern. They had a private sexual relationship. The media found out and made something that was supposed to be private into public knowledge. The media didn't have to know about his mistake. It destroyed his credibility just like it did to Prochazka. Now, instead of being known as a president who did wonders for the United States, he will be remembered as the president who had a scandalous affair with someone. That was his private business, and the media should not have brought it out into the open. In private, we may talk about people, but since it is private, we expect people not to know. Private life should stay private. Everyone has made mistakes and have private things in their closet. No one should know that the private things are skeletons. One doesn't even have the right to reveal another's private issues, even if they reveal theirs. The only person allowed to reveal personal info is the person himself. One needs to keep those two worlds separated. 4. You want to go lower.
No, I want to
Oh.
go. I know. I always give them.
Most of
Yeah, I go up. No, I just don't know.
There's
He
only
only has
like 1%
one.
evidence.
Like,
Yeah,
so
so
that's
it's
not
not
The-
kind of like
now.
The evidence is
There's
Clinton.
one piece of evidence.
But they
What-
explained it
Really well.
They do more explanation about it than the other person. I would say the issue is they keep going back, though, to that one example. You could, and we'll have an essay that does this, you can do general logic, but you want to be able to elaborate that it's not just, like, this kind of ends up being, this is an isolated take on the Clinton scandal. It should have been private, not public. But there's not a whole lot to it that is making me go, okay, it goes beyond the realms of that example. Bree?
So like, he only has one example, but I feel like he has more of his own argument, so what is like the ratio between those two?
Everyone will have your own argument in the sense that it's your stance, but you need to validate that argument with the examples. And that's where, that's because, the argument's pretty much going to be unified throughout the whole thing. The body paragraphs, like this one here and then this one here, they don't really build upon one another, I don't think. And another thing for me, I know this is taste and style, I don't like the writing. I think it's choppy. I think it's clunky. People make mistakes. It is that simple. Private life should stay private. Like, it's not immature, but I don't think there's a control of writing as much as you would see with some other essays. The big thing is support, because everyone's going to have a stance. And it's okay to have, like, Bree, when you're saying it's okay to have your own reasons, it doesn't mean that you have to have a historical example or a news story that's going on to back it up, but you should be able to explain it beyond, I feel like this is a circular argument. Private life should be private because it's private. Public life can be in the public because it's public. You know, why is it private? Because it's private. If it were getting into relationships with other people are meant to be on an individual basis, even though this is the President of the United States, he hasn't given up his right to a personal relationship. That's something where, okay, now you could be building upon it somewhat. But right now, private is private. Public is public. They should stay that way. Gets a 4. I don't have a problem with it being a 4.
So, do you get, like, if you are on the 4th essay and it's not as good as your first one, could they say, like, oh, that was the 4th essay that they wrote?
Well, it'll be 3rd, as I hold up 4 fingers.
Well, yeah, 3rd.
Yeah. Your last one.
Would you get, like, slack?
No, because there's no, I mean, because they honestly don't know if you wrote it first, second, or, well, actually they would, because you would tell them. You don't have to go in order. But no, they would, the expectation is that according to that rubric, this is what you would be able to do. So in theory, sure, you could get a 9 because you spent an hour and a half on one and then get 2 2s when you wrote each one in 15 minutes. But they all get graded on the same kind of idea rubric.
Wait, do you get them like all at once?
Yep. So you got,
Can't you like pick which one that you?
yes. Most will do the first one first. Because it's the synthesis, so it has the sources to go along with it. But if you want to do the rhetorical analysis first, you could. You want to do the DRQ first, you could. Save synthesis for the end, you could. But the idea is that you would, it's suggested that you would spend 40 minutes on each one. So I guess at the very least, the expectation is this is what the person did in 40 minutes. So you come in late, unexcused absence, you have 25 minutes to finish the essay that they already started. Yours gets scored on the same realm as what everyone else would be. Most go 1, 2, 3 because we just go 1, 2, 3. But you can go whatever order you want.
Seems like by the end, like I would be so like mentally exhausted.
It sounds weird to say. Adrenaline does kind of kick in and kind of push you through. It's like that whole pain thing, you know, we were talking about yesterday. Afterwards, you're like, that was terrible. But while it's going on, I think you're okay. Plus, you don't want to let me down.
That's right, Mr. Chairman.
Otherwise, you'd never be invited to my house. Not like you will be anyway.
That's all right.
Milan Kundera claims that we all act like Prochazka. He says in private we badmouth our friends and use coarse language, that we act different in private than in public is everyone's most conspicuous experience. This we all know to be true, which is why Kundera states that the private and public are 2 different worlds. Kundera is alluding to the fact that we act completely different when in public than in private. Kundera says that the 2 worlds should remain separate. Kundera begins every sentence with Kundera. Kundera thinks that people have a right to have their private life separate from their public one. They have a right to say whatever they want when they are in private. Kundera thinks that people should not tamper with other people's private lives, such as was done to Prochazka. Kundera thinks that this is what this is what is the real crime rather than what Prochazka said.
I'm gonna go with
No,
2 and 10.
that was.
I think this is an 8.
No, it's 10.
Now, if you